Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the summary statement of the SOL Symposium. John Shartle and I were able to attend the symposium just north of Milan this past year and found it to be extremely informative and very, very exciting. I want to give you my encouragement to realize the basic question we all have in life: are we alone in the universe? And what's really going on at this time in history to help us have a better understanding. We think the SOL Symposium and the SOL Forum is wonderful opportunities for us to do so. So what I'd like to just mention very simply is that, first of all, the SOL Symposium was a first-class operation, which John will indicate for us, and we have a first-class report. John's report is terrific. Also, no worry at all about how long it takes us to do this report. It's an opportunity for us to go into greater depth, and I just hope that you'll be able to use this as a wonderful occasion for knowing more about UAPs. John will begin with a very nice background of the SOL Foundation and some other things. Then we'll do the actual report itself. And most of all, I just want to encourage you, please feel very comfortable to do the discussion. Please feel very comfortable to discuss. This will be recorded. With that, let me introduce John Shartle. Make one basic comment and then another one. First of all, John was a great travel mate, and I thank John for all of the things he did make our trip possible. Thank you very kindly, John. But most of all, John is probably the most knowledgeable person I know about these types of things. We're very blessed to have John as the chairperson of our Cosmic Citizens Committee, and of course, especially to have him deliver this report tonight. So, John, let me turn it over to you.
Well, thanks, Vince, and I will turn the compliment back to you. You are a wonderful travel companion, and I really deeply appreciate the opportunity to go to the SOL Symposium with you. That was a terrific experience. There are a couple of things I'd like to do before we get into the meat and potatoes of this, because first of all, I know if I don't mention it at the top, I will forget. And I think there are important things that I just want to mention to you related to this topic. The first thing I want to mention, and I just found this out today, that one of the people we're going to be talking about in this report was a political scientist from Germany by the name of Dr. Christian Peters, who gave a terrific presentation at the SOL Symposium. And I was just listening to podcasts today, and there he popped up on one of my favorite podcasts today. So if you're interested at all, if you listen to podcasts, I would encourage you. I'm about halfway through the interview, and it's a long one. But he's a very thoughtful guy on this topic, and I would encourage you to listen to it. Again, his name is Dr. Christian Peters, and the name of the podcast, it's easy to remember, is called That UFO Podcast. And in fact, the guy who runs this podcast was at the SOL Symposium, and I had the chance to say hello to him and how much I appreciate the really solid work that he does on this topic. His name is Andy, or as I call him, because he has this very thick Scottish accent, Andy. So he's a seriously nice guy, and it was just a pleasure to meet him. I encourage you to do that. The other thing I want to mention is there's a movie coming out on the 21st, and this has been coming out for a long time. There's been some, kind of wondering why this hasn't come out sooner. But the movie is called The Age of Disclosure. And this takes a bit of maybe a national security view of the topic. But by all accounts, it is a terrific movie, and it's full of people that really are important and have things to say. People at the very highest levels of government saying kind of unbelievable things about this topic. So I would encourage you, if you have the opportunity, to watch that. And just the last thing I want to mention is I just found out today again that one of the first people to present at the first SOL Symposium in 2023 is a professor at the University of Albany, and they have just been given a very large endowment for it's called an endowment for UAP studies. So they are really taking this seriously in academia now. This is no longer a fringe topic, and I think you'll see that as we go through this report. This topic, whatever your thoughts on it, is definitely moving into mainstream. And in fact, I would say has already moved into mainstream. So those are the three things that I wanted to mention before we get started. I do want to let you know that I'm going to wear my SOL hat that I got at the symposium. That's the SOL. Yeah, there you go. It makes me feel like I'm there. And I'm going to wear this for our presentation tonight. And I'm also going to be drinking from my Ancient Aliens cup, which I also enjoy on television. So off to the
John, you
races.
should have my SOL t-shirt on. My goodness.
Yes, Vince, I'm surprised you're not wearing it.
I'm surprised I'm not wearing it myself as well. Thank you, John.
Yes. So I want to start with a little bit of an introduction. The report that you may have seen that I did for our Cosmic Citizens Committee is available on the website. If you go back to the year before, I did a fairly extensive review of what SOL is and what the connection is between SOL and Now Creations. I would encourage you to read that. I didn't want to take up this whole report to do that when it already exists on the website. So if you have any questions about that, I'll be happy to answer it through the course of the evening, or maybe next evening when we do this. But I just thought it was kind of, for the sake of time, we would just make that available to you on the website. So I'd like to just start with a brief introduction, which I think is really important to lead in. As I was thinking about this presentation, I thought, you know what, there needs to be a little lead in to this. So I'd like to just read this to you, and then we'll get into the report. So I call this the expanding edge of science, a prelude to the work of the SOL Symposium. From Pythagoras to Galileo, from Giordano Bruno to Newton, from Einstein to Planck, Bohr, Schrödinger, and Heisenberg, all the way to Stephen Hawking, science has never stood still. It expands, it stumbles, it course corrects. Every generation believes it stands on solid ground until the ground shifts beneath its feet. We like to think of the Enlightenment as the age when reason triumphed over superstition, and in many ways it did. But in doing so, it also declared a kind of divorce. To be rational was to distance oneself from the spiritual, the mystical, the unseen. For centuries, that split remained firmly in place, but now we're seeing the edges blur again. People are reaching back toward mystery. Something's shifting. The hunger for what lies beyond the material is returning, and it's not regression, it is expansion. At the close of the 19th century, the prevailing scientific mood was one of finality. The often misattributed quote to Lord Kelvin put it this way: "There is nothing new to be discovered in physics now. All that remains is more and more precise measurement." Even if Lord Kelvin never said it exactly in those words, the statement was real, and yet it was deeply and profoundly wrong. Then came Einstein and relativity. Then came Hubble and the expanded universe. Then came Planck, Bohr, Schrödinger, Heisenberg, and the quantum revolution, and so many more. A few weeks ago, I wrote a report for the Cosmic Citizens Committee about Edwin Hubble and one of the great scientific revelations of the modern era, and yet one that often slips under the radar. For most of human history, we believed the Milky Way was the entire universe. Even Einstein thought so. Then, in the 1920s, Hubble turned his eyes to the sky and rewrote everything. Using Cepheid variable stars as distance markers, he showed that the faint fuzzy stars at the edge of his telescope were actually entire galaxies, millions of light years away. It was like the Truman Show, if you remember the movie The Truman Show, touching the edge of the sky and discovering it wasn't the sky at all. In a moment, the universe didn't just expand. We shrank, not in spirit, but in certainty. And in that shrinking came a deepening of reverence, of curiosity, and humility. This is the rhythm of science. This is the rhythm of science, confident declarations undone by deeper truths. And that brings us here tonight to the work of the SOL Foundation. Because just as Copernicus unseated Earth and Hubble unseated the Milky Way, something is once again stirring at the edge of consensus. The frontier is no longer just the physical. It is consciousness, it is spiritual, and it is metaphysical, and it represents real contact with the phenomenon. We are being invited, and some may say compelled, to revisit the very nature of reality. The scientists, scholars, and experiencers gathered at the recent SOL Foundation Symposium and Lago Maggiore are not chasing fringe ideas. They are doing what science at its best has always done, standing at the edge of the known and asking, what if we've missed something fundamental? Most importantly, science is now inviting the metaphysical and the spiritual back into the conversation. And here's the key. The phenomenon is so much bigger than we imagine. Even with all our frameworks, scientific, spiritual, philosophical, and psychological, we may be like someone standing inside a planetarium, convinced that the stars above us are the whole cosmos, unaware that the real night sky lies far beyond. We see symbols and lights and projections, real in one sense, but just a hint of something vastly more and outside our perceptual range. In other words, the mystery is not just bigger than we know, it may be bigger than we can know. Almost done. So just like Hubble shattered our sense of the known universe, the work being done today, right now, by the SOL Foundation is gently but unmistakably pulling back the veil on an even deeper mystery. Not just what's out there, but who or what might be making itself known. And in the face of that mystery, we're being asked not to reduce it, but to respect it, not to categorize it, but to sit with it, not to prove, but to perceive. The more we know we don't know. And the ones who embrace that with curiosity and not fear are the ones leading us forward. These are interesting times for all of us. Wherever you stand on the issue of the phenomenon, UAPs, etc., we are all bearing witness to a significant transformation in our society, and the SOL Foundation is daring to explore what's going on and create a dialogue around a topic that was once considered untouchable. So thank you for indulging me on that. I just thought that was important to get the ball rolling on what we're going to be talking about tonight, because it's a really big conversation.
John, let me take a moment, just if I may. And first of all, let me just say that was really well presented. It was really well presented. I think we need to acknowledge these things, that we're very fortunate to have these comments presented as you did in such a clear way for us, and yet also a very provocative way that makes us go a little deeper. So well done, John. Very well done. And let me just ask, before we move into the report, are there any questions that anyone would like to mention on that introduction? Any questions at all that you would like to raise? Tina.
Yes, I'm wondering where the movie can be viewed on November 21st.
It's available on Prime Video, if you have that. Yes, and I think there's a fee for it. I don't know what the fee is, but it's available for rent and for purchase.
Thank you.
I'm not getting any kind of a kickback for recommending the movie, by the way. I just want you to know that.
Thank you, Tina. That's a good question for us. Is there anything else before we proceed? Okay. And we are on two screens here, so if I don't see your hand or John doesn't see your hand, please just say, hey, Vince, or hey, John. With that, John, I think we're ready to proceed then.
Sure. Okay, thank you. So with that in mind, I'll just tell you a little bit about the framework of the SOL Foundation, which was much like it was last year. I had the good fortune to go last year as well in San Francisco. It was broken into, well, this year they added a half day on Monday, which we didn't attend because, frankly, we didn't really realize there was going to be a half day on Monday. But it was broken into two days. Each day, half day had a theme to it. So the morning, the afternoon, each had different themes on Saturday and Sunday. The first day, and let me give you just a little background about this place. I want to tell you, it was a beautiful place in Italy. And I want to thank, before I say another word, honestly, I want to just thank Vince for making this all possible. His open-mindedness and his just willingness to entertain these ideas and lead so many of us through these really big concepts is just really deeply appreciated by me, and I know by everybody here, Vince. So thank you for that. I can't say that enough, frankly, but I'll say it again. So again, they were broken into half days, and the first day, the half day, started off, it was called the UAP situation today. And again, just as a reminder, UAP stands for Unidentified Anomalous Phenomenon. They used to call them UFO.
One more time, John. We're on page 1 of the report now. We're at the bottom quarter of the page. Day 1, morning, the UAP situation today. Just want to make sure you're clear with that. Thank you.
And just so you know, Vince, I'm working off my own notes on this. I have the report here, but I'm working off my own notes.
Okay, no problem. And I may then just tell people every once in a while where you are.
Okay, that's fine.
Sure.
That's good. So day 1, I think they did this brilliantly. So day 1 was called the UAP situation today. And in large measure, this morning session was about nuts and bolts stuff, scientific stuff, some philosophical stuff, some political stuff. The session started off, though, with Dr. Beatrice Villarreal. And Dr. Villarreal has been she was certainly there last year, and I believe she was at SOL the year before. She is a Swedish scientist, an astrophysicist, and she is with the Nordic Institute for Theoretical Science. So she is a woman who knows what she's doing. She's a very bright woman, and she's been working on this project for years. And so often when we get into this topic, people want to talk about really dramatic stuff, saucers in the sky and, beings. And that's all very important stuff. Dr. Villarreal is a very understated person, and her work is really groundbreaking. It doesn't really come through that way sometimes when you're just reading about it. But what she did was really fascinating. In a nutshell, what she did was she went back to the Palomar Observatory, which is a big observatory in California, and looked at photographic plates that were taken from 1949, I believe, to 1956. And what she did was she compared, I'm not going to do it justice, but she compared photographic plates that were taken of the same section of the sky at different times. And what she noticed in many, I think there's 105,000 different instances of this, that she found that pictures identical in many ways were not. There were images of things in the sky out beyond Earth's atmosphere that were there in one picture and they were not in another picture. And sometimes they were in lined up formation, and sometimes they were in different patterns. She also found that these things just happened to be out there at times that were around significant times on Earth, like nuclear testing and that sort of thing. And by the way, one of the subtexts of this whole conversation is that there is a deep and deeply misunderstood connection between UAP and nuclear testing. I mean, you can draw your own conclusions around that, but there is just kind of this indication by almost everybody that there is some interest in whatever's going on in what we're doing with nuclear capabilities. There are nuclear testing of nuclear weapons, nuclear sites. We don't know what that's about. But anyway, she found that these, what she calls transients in the sky, were out there. And the reason that she picked 1949 to 1956 is because, in theory, the sky would be clear outside the atmosphere because we didn't have any satellites up there. The first satellite was launched in 1957, Sputnik. It's one of the few things I can say. I'm too young to remember that, but it did occur before me. Sputnik was the first artificial satellite in the sky launched by the Soviet Union. So there should be nothing out there at that altitude in space. Some of this going many thousands of miles out. So it raises the question, what is this? And why are they there? Now, it sounds like, well, maybe it was a meteor and all that kind of stuff. You could say that, but I can tell you that her work has been peer reviewed. So all of those things have been factored out. All those sort of normal, what they call prosaic explanations have been factored out. Now, she's not saying these are UAP. She can't say that as a scientist. She can't say that. She can say, we don't know what they are, and we can do further study, but she can't draw that conclusion. And I respect that she doesn't draw that conclusion. But, and I don't know math. John, I'm going to maybe point to John Hoops here because he's the old math hand. But her work has been tested to something called 22 sigma, which is an astronomical level of accuracy, I guess you would call it, where you can kind of factor out errors. It's like into the trillions that her work is likely to be actually just true and not the result of some errant, calculation or something. So that's how the day started off. And that was really thought-provoking that it started, and I appreciated that it started with grounded three-dimensional stuff. Before we got into the theories and all this stuff, we started off with hard science, which is where this subject has been for a long time. It may be moving out of that, but it's always been grounded in hard science. And she did a great job of presenting it. She was kind of the star of the show that morning, and rightfully so. Her work is really groundbreaking. And I think of all the things that we talk about today, her work is going to sort of lead the way for science to bridge the gap into this conversation. I think she's really done great work in making this work accessible to scientists and not dismissing it as fringe, being able to say, yeah, this is real science happening here. So that was Dr. Villarreal's presentation. It was clean, methodical, and straight to the point, and really powerful. So I was really grateful to be able to see her make that presentation. So I'm going to move on to the next presentation. And again, if anybody has a question, please just raise your hand. I'm happy to answer. Looks like John has a question.
I do, John. First of all, I do remember Sputniks. I was out there with my dad watching them in the sky. I mean, it was fun. It was a treat. My question, John, is could we put a definition to the word transient? I'm sure it was clear in the presentation she made, but it's kind of a fuzzy term to me when I was looking over the notes. I just need a little more what's meant by transient.
Sure. Transience is just the term that she applied to the things that were there in one photograph and not there in the other. They were transient. They were on their way somewhere else, basically.
Very good. That was
yeah.
You did explain that well, and I have listened to her. That's really interesting to go back that many years and look at plates.
Yeah.
Some 75 years ago, and then observe the changes. Do you know? I'm probably asking how she got access to those or where those are kept.
Well, there's a whole story to that. She was at the, I presume, John, that these plates are still kept at the Palomar Observatory somewhere. I'm sure they've been digitized and all this since way back when. And Palomar is somewhere in California. I'm not exactly sure where, but it's a major, I think at the time it was the largest observatory in the world, or the largest astronomical observatory in the world. I believe that's true. There's an interesting thing about this, though, and this is a whole other conversation, but when she was doing her work, there was a, I can't think of the guy's name, but he was the director of I believe he was the director of the Palomar Observatory. He somehow worked for the government or something, and he attempted to get rid of all this stuff. He attempted to delete massive quantities of information, and nobody can quite explain why he did that. And it kind of leads you to the idea that maybe he knew something about this. Maybe he knew that someday somebody would be looking at this and wanted to get rid of it. But that's a whole other conversation. And she doesn't dwell on that. She just, she's a great scientist, because what she does is she doesn't speculate. She just says, this happened, period, and so that's an interesting thing. But anyway, that's to answer your question. I believe she just went back to the observatory, and she has a project called the Basco, which is exactly what it's the name of the project that she was working on. It's very well credentialed, and the institute that she comes from in Sweden, the Nordic Institute for Theoretical Science, is highly accredited, and so I'm sure they gave her direct access.
Thank you, John. Thank you.
Yes. Any other questions about Beatrice? All right. So we're going to move on to another returning star of the SOL Foundation. Colonel Carl Nell was at the first SOL Foundation presentation. He was there last year when I was there, and he was there again this year. And just to give you a little background on Carl Nell, he is a retired Army colonel. He's a brilliant guy. You can tell when a guy opens his mouth that he is very well versed on history, probably everything. I would call him probably a polymath. If there's anybody here that fits that term, I would call him a polymath. And what he did here at this symposium, he called this, I forget what he called it. It was something about five good Roman emperors or something. And what he did is he compared 5 Roman emperors from antiquity, and it was pretty in depth, and he did it in, what he thought was a lighthearted way. For me, it was a history lesson, to talk about these emperors and the political realities of their times, and, information and how things had to be conveyed and what difficulties they had with maybe politics or, the environment or, whatever was going on in their time. How they led was directly in response to those kinds of situations. And the parallel that he was making is that we have similar situations today. Politics doesn't happen in a vacuum. Anything that's going on has some context outside of the issue itself. I think that was the larger message that he was trying to convey. And it's the same for the UAP conversation, because, there are those who, and I follow this very closely. There are those who are demanding UAP disclosure. Why can't the government just say this is true? Why doesn't the president come out? Well, as much as I might like that, there is a reality to this. I mean, there is a much larger reality. And we're going to talk about some of this in the questions that I'd like to ask towards the end. But, we all have things that we think are important. And I don't really think that there are too many more important things than this. But, there are a lot of important issues. And so whatever information is released by the government is set within a political reality. One of the things that he said, and I think a few other people, I know a few other people indicated this, is we've reached a point in this conversation where, the old movies used to kind of show, the flying saucer landing on the White House lawn and the president coming out or something, making a statement. That's probably not going to happen. It's just not going to happen that way. And so the government doesn't own this information. I mean, the government doesn't own UFOs or UAPs or the reality of it. I think it's going to bleed into our consciousness in other ways. I think by journalism, I think by experiencers. There are people out there every day having real experiences with whatever this is, whether it's craft, whether it's through dreams, whether it's through visions, voices, all kinds of things. It's reaching into humanity, and we don't need the government to tell us it's real. So, Carl's previous presentations in 2023 and 2024 made this comparison between controlled disclosure, which is where the government manages the release of the information, and what he calls catastrophic disclosure, which is one day we wake up and there's a craft in the sky over New York City or something. Now, I don't know if either of those two extremes are ever going to happen, but I think we're starting to see, with the increase in sightings and the increase in people reporting things, we're having some kind of disclosure happen around us, whether we even acknowledge it or not. So while he did it sort of in a historical sense, his point was, I believe the underlying point was, the government has certain realities that it has to be mindful of, and you can't expect it to come out and say this when there are other things that kind of press in on this issue. But don't lose hope. The issue is still going to be, this can't be contained, is the bottom line. This issue will come out one way or another. So I appreciated his presentation. It was very historical. It was very intellectual. And he made some great points, and he's a good speaker on top of that. So it was a great presentation.
I'll second that. Excellent speaker.
He was an excellent speaker. Yeah, he's been great in all 3 of the forums. And in fact, I would encourage you, if I'll say this here, and I may say it again later. If you have the time and the interest, I would encourage you to go back and look at the SOL Foundation videos from the last 2 years. He's on there. Many other people are really, really good people are in these videos, and they're really well worth watching. The ones from this symposium will be available probably in the next month. I would say probably after the first of the year, but they'll be available too, free on YouTube at the SOL Foundation website. So I would encourage you to do that. So after Carl Nell, which was a great presentation. We started to move into the what I'll call the international phase of this symposium, and just to give you some context, the last two symposia, I guess that's what it is, symposia, were in the United States, and this is obviously an international subject. So I think there was a deliberate, conscious decision to move it into Europe because there's a lot of work going on in Europe. There's a lot of stuff. We get very focused on American things sometimes. I do as well as anybody else, what's going on here. But there's a lot of stuff happening in other countries related to this topic and otherwise. And I think that this symposium was an effort to sort of bring that into people's awareness. So we had a number of international presentations. This was the first of them. Two gentlemen, Luc Dini was his name. He's an aerospace engineer. And a guy named General Pierre Bescond. He is a retired French general. And he was the general. He has a longer title than that, but he was specifically in charge of space considerations, space concerns, space threats. He had a pretty big job in the French military. But they did a really good job of sort of framing what I just told you. They did a good job of saying, hey, this isn't an entirely American subject. There's been a long history of the Europeans, particularly the French, doing big work in this. There's a whole French group that studied this topic for years called the Cometa or group. And they have a report that is out there for anybody to review that talked about these things very frankly and if I may say, in a way that you're not going to see many American reports speaking so candidly about this topic. So it was great for me to have that sort of awareness. I kind of knew that in the background, but it was great to have that sort of reinforced that this isn't just an American topic, it's an international topic. And, Vince, I would ask if you had any thoughts on that, and if not, I'll just move on.
I think we'll cover a future thought when we talk about the importance of international cooperation. So I'll hold myself. I probably will say one other thing that I should say one other thing. We'll come to the Magenta report a little bit later on, and that was pre-Roswell. So I think we think of Roswell, that was it. But there are many other reports from many different places that were pre-Roswell. And that I think is an important thing just to consider. But John, I think you're doing a great job. So let me turn right back to you.
Okay. So so then it was lunchtime, and we had a really nice break there. We had about an hour and 15 minutes break, and it was, again, it was first class operation all around. So I'll spare you the details, but it was really nice. And then we moved into the afternoon session, and the afternoon session was entitled The Bigger Picture. And I found this very interesting. I loved all these speakers. I'm a big fan of Dr. Diana Pasulka, and of course, Peter Skafish, and this other guy I hadn't heard of, but I'll take them one at a time. So Dr. Diana Walsh-Pasulka is a professor.
Excuse me one more time, John. We're on the second page, and the afternoon is entitled Understanding the Ramifications. So I just want to mention it here. That's fine. Understanding the Ramifications. To be in the middle of the second page, and John's going to take those three particular presentations now. John, if you can.
Yeah, that was my shorthand. Sorry about that. Mm-hmm. So Dr. Diana Walsh-Pasulka is, I'm pretty familiar with her. I've read a couple of her books, and I actually took an online class with her. And she's a very interesting person. She's a very down-to-earth person. She wasn't physically at the symposium. She was there by video. But her report was called AI, Angels or AI, Higher Order Beings in a Post-Biological Universe. And she brought in a lot of reference to a guy named Dr. Stephen Dick, who, one of the conversations is, what is this that we're dealing with? It's the what question. What are we talking about here? And this is not the final word on the conversation. It was just one perspective on this. So Dr. Pasulka is a professor of religious studies at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington. So she comes at it from that perspective. And again, you have to sort of understand, she started off as a skeptic. I'll just give you a little brief history on her. She started off as a skeptic on this topic the whole topic of UAPs. She, many years ago, was going to write a book about how she viewed the UAP community as the emergence of a 20th century religion. And once she's a Catholic scholar, by the way. And once she started digging into this topic, she realized this is not a fringe thing. This is real. And so she's put a lot of work into the idea of how, we're not just talking about craft in the sky. We may be talking about entities. I'll use the words that get used often, angels, perhaps, or, sometimes people say demons. I don't necessarily ascribe to that, but, some kind of otherworldly thing. And you think about it, we've talked about this in many of the holy books of the world forever, visitations from the sky, from beings with superior power and knowledge. So she makes the parallel between that in her work a lot. And she went over a number of, some really important cases, really mostly from Catholic tradition, where there are these, visitations by the Virgin Mary. Whether it's, what's the famous one in Portugal?
Fatima.
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 Fatima, yes. And then there's one in Egypt where over the course of 3 years, there was this presence that showed up over this one church, at night, and people flocked to it. I had never heard of that. I'd never heard of this, but there are actually pictures of it. So Fatima, there was one in Spain, this one in Egypt, and others, Medjugorje in Yugoslavia. And so she makes the, again, this is thought provoking. It's not meant to make any declarations. It's just meant to sort of, let's talk about this because we're talking about the unknown. So, maybe there are elements of this in the conversation. So this was one of my favorite conversations that she had. And partly because, and this is, I'll own that this is my own interest and my own sort of curiosity. In the title is Angels or AI. One of the things that was brought forward in this symposium in a number of different ways, not forcefully, nobody making declarations, is what are we dealing with when we're talking about AI now? What is that? What does that mean in this conversation and the larger conversation? And I think it means a lot of things. It's I don't think those things are fully defined yet. We're just at the front edge of what AI is doing in our lives. And so I think it's a good time to start talking about it, honestly. I think that the idea that AI is just some fancy calculator is really not true. And we're going to have to start getting comfortable with that idea. And so I appreciated that she brought that into it, that there can be many things that can be part of the mystery. Let's start talking about that. So that it was a good presentation. I enjoyed it. I wish that she had been there personally, but she wasn't able to be there. So, we'll take what we can get sometimes. So then we moved into Dr. Peter Skafish. And Dr. Skafish is a cultural anthropologist. He is one of the co-founders of the SOL Foundation. And he is just a terrific speaker and a very bright guy, just a really bright man. He's able to take really large concepts and just kind of boil them down into sort of everyday language that you can grasp. And we had the good fortune last year, and maybe many of you were there, Dr. Skafish actually took some time to speak to our group. I don't know if anybody was there for that, but he's a really smart guy. And his theme, his area of interest, which he's talked about in the last two symposium in different ways, but basically the message is, do we have, we all want to think about, UAP and meeting, quote unquote aliens and having a dynamic there, but are we really ready for that from a cultural standpoint? Do we have a framework for even dealing with that, with communication or understanding what intentions are, or their understanding of our intentions? He's even moved away. One of the things that he mentioned here is that we use all kinds of language in this discussion, aliens, UFOs. He has stopped using the term aliens. He has moved to this phrase the others, because we don't know what they are. We don't know if they're alien. We don't know anything. We really don't know much about them, or even if they are them at all. It's more of a kind of a concept. So he has stopped using that term, but his conversation was, as we move forward, as this gets taken more seriously, we need to start developing frameworks for that. We can't just rely on the fact that they're going to show up, make themselves known, and we're going to know what to do. We may not know what to do. So we need to have an interdisciplinary approach to this. We need to have philosophers thinking about it. We need to have religious folks thinking about it. We need to have scientists thinking about it. But we need to have thinkers involved in this, because it's a multidisciplinary thing that will affect all of humanity in just about every way, when and if that moment happens. So I thought it was a terrific presentation. Vince, it looks like were you going to say something about that?
I would certainly agree with you, John. The notion very simply is to realize, of course, I'll put my own spin on it. We're all part of a oneness. And we just have to realize that we are all entities within the one more universal frame. So I think it's nice to say, rather than them being alien, they are simply others, different from ourselves, that I would say all part of the oneness.
Thank you, Vince. So the day moved on, and this is one of the things I really appreciate about SOL is they try to bring many voices in. And this guy, his name is Dr. I'm going to try and say his name right, Dr. Karl Svosel. I would say that's probably pretty close. I looked at his resume. I was going to put his resume on here, and it was too long, which says how credentialed this guy is. He's a highly credentialed Austrian physicist. Let's just leave it there. And, he had a really great presentation. I really appreciated the fact that he wanted to say, and again, he's a man of science. He's coming at this from a very scientific and very rational frame of mind. And he's saying, we're getting behind the eight ball, us in the world of science, because this conversation needs to be expanded. And physics, which is notoriously dig their heels in on these topics, just refuses to look at this. They still, in many quarters, hard scientists think this is just a ridiculous topic. And if you look at this guy, he looked like Einstein. Okay, to me, he looked like Einstein up on stage. He had the whole, wild hair thing going on and the German accent, and I thought I was, watching Einstein reincarnated. But he's a very serious guy, and he's saying, "Look, my field, the one I'm in, is getting behind on this topic, and we're gonna lose the race." So I appreciated this voice of science coming in and saying, we need to be involved in this conversation. It's not fringe, it's not crazy. This is real. And we need to bring the hard sciences in just as much as we're talking about it now in philosophy and sociology. Science has a place in this that is not just looking at the stars, that's trying to figure out the physics of this stuff. And I really appreciated his approach to this. He was very entertaining. And I had a few minutes to talk to him after the presentation in one of our breaks, and just told him how much I appreciated him being there. And I think he really, I don't think it's a comfortable place for him to be honest with you, because I think he has to go back and, work among colleagues who don't necessarily think he's altogether sane, but he's a very sane man and a very smart man. And I really enjoyed his presentation. So that was, I just really enjoyed his presentation. So I'm going to take a pause there and just ask any questions about any of those three speakers, because I can blow through all of these, but I want to take a pause and just see if anybody has any questions at this point.
I think we have two more, John, if you wouldn't mind to
Sure.
Today. Let's I think that would be maybe the better place to pause.
Okay.
That'll be the completion of day one. I think we have Jacques Vallée, and then the next gentleman, and we'll take a little pause there. And we'll give you a break too, John.
All right. Well, I have some questions too that I'd like to, I want to leave plenty of time for questions. We'll cover these and then we'll get into questions. So
sure. Let's take
so then we moved later into the day, we moved into Dr. Jacques Vallée. And even if you're not familiar with UAP studies, you may have heard of Jacques Vallée. He's kind of a legend. He too is a polymath. He's a computer scientist. He was involved in the creation of the internet, so many things. But he has been he's also an astronomer. He has been studying this topic since literally the early 60s. And he's written some of the seminal books on UAP studies that take the conversation outside of nuts and bolts into sort of more mythological terms. There's a book that I'm determined to read. That's just I know it's a book I need to read. I just haven't done it yet. It's called Passport to Magonia. It's basically considered his essential work. So I would encourage
John,
anyone.
one more presentation of the title again, just nice and slow. Passport to
So the name of the book is called Passport to Magonia.
Madonia.
Magonia.
Magonia.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. So Dr. Vallée, again, he's kind of a legend in this field. He was, I think, struggling a little bit because he's getting up in years, but he did a great job, and he presented a case. He wanted to present a case that is outside of the flash. Like many of the UFO cases have a lot of, sort of dramatic flair to them, and this is one that does not. But to him, it's one of the essential cases of, the UFO story that has a lot of credibility to it. And it's the story of Haynesville, Louisiana. And it's a very simple case. This guy was driving down the road with his family. They saw this sort of inexplicable light in the woods. He reported it. They went back, they did studies, and they kind of figured that there's really nothing else that could have been there. And this light that was there, whatever it was, transmitted radiation into some of the wood and the trees that were there. So Dr. Vallée has pieces of this wood that at some point, when technology gets to the point where it can examine the wood without destroying the wood, he's going to do that. But he went into the hard science and the investigative work that's necessary if you're going to take this seriously. And he did a great job of explaining that. There were maps, and he used maps and talked about the science of all this stuff, and it was very interesting. But his point being that not every UFO case, not every encounter with the phenomenon is going to be flashy. It's not going to result in an abduction. Sometimes it can just be driving down the road, seeing something strange in the woods, reporting it, and having it turn out, yeah, that was a weird thing. We don't know what that was. It was a good. When he started off, I thought, wow, I'm not going to be really interested in this. I've never heard of this. And I'm so glad he did this particular case, because I have never heard of it. And now I think it's a really important case. So it was great to hear from him. And I mentioned this, I think I mentioned this last year, but I'll mention it again. If you've ever seen the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and I'm sure many of us have seen Close Encounters of the Third Kind, you'll recall in the movie, there is this French scientist who's kind of the guy that's trying to figure everything out. His name is Lacombe in the movie. He's a central character in the movie. Well, anyway, that character is based directly on Jacques Vallée, because he was doing this even back then and before, and was kind of known for this even back then. So Steven Spielberg thought he was important enough to characterize him in his movie, and that's not a secret or a speculation. That's well known. So he's legendary, and he is a man who really promotes science as much as he promotes speculation. So it was great to see him there.
Let me just add one other point. I think the Haynesville, Louisiana incident also was pre-Roswell. So I think those are pretty interesting things. I think it was. Maybe not.
We'll check that.
Yeah, thank you, John.
Yeah.
Might not have been if it wasn't my error, but I thought it was. But go ahead.
I thought it was the 60s, but that's okay. We'll verify that.
Maybe it was.
Yeah.
Thank you, John.
Yeah.
I defer to your judgment on that one.
Well, I look, I need to fact check myself sometimes, Vince.
Anyways, it was early. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, John.
So the day moved on, and we closed out with a basically a fireside chat with Dr. Gary Nolan. And I'll just tell you a little bit about Dr. Nolan. He's a very interesting guy. He was much more present last year than he was this year, but I was glad he was there for this particular session. He is a Stanford immunologist. He's a PhD immunologist, and he has something like 40 patents to his name. And I'm not here to give you people's credentials because I don't think necessarily credentials tell the story all the time. But he is a very bright guy. And he became interested in this topic through a very strange series of events. If you want to know what they are, email me and I'll tell you the whole story. But I won't take up a lot of time with that right now. But through a series of very interesting, very curious events, information was brought to him that really opened up his mind to the topic of the UAP phenomenon. And so he is a co-founder of the SOL Foundation. And he had a fireside chat with a gentleman by the name of Jake Barber. And this is a very interesting area. So Jake Barber, you may have seen, I don't know, he was on TV last January. It's when he first kind of showed up on the scene. Jake Barber was a military helicopter pilot. He was I believe he was in the Army, but he was also working, when you get into the military, sometimes, you may be working directly for the military, or you may be working for a contractor. And I think he was kind of in that gray zone where his work kind of went back and forth between direct military and sometimes, contractors that are working on very secretive stuff. Jake had a couple of experiences, and he conveyed this in an interview last year on TV, where he was, one of his jobs was to recover objects in the desert of California. And on this one occasion, he was called out for something that was very, very, very secretive. And he showed up, and it was this sort of what he called an egg-shaped thing about 20 feet long. And he was, through a series of events that I won't, go into right now, he was very convinced that this was something from not made on Earth, basically. And his job was to pick this thing up with his helicopter, transport it to another location, and basically leave it there. Of course, this was very strange to him, but he did what he was told to do. And then on another occasion, same idea, he was called out to pick something up, and this thing was an octagonal thing. He called it the 8-gon, and it was an octagonal craft, basically, that he picked up with his helicopter to be transported to another location. And when he did this, he had an experience that he describes as a very deeply spiritual experience. He felt that the craft was communicating with him directly. He felt that he used the word possession, but I don't think he meant possession in a demonic way. He just meant that he felt infused with the spirit. He felt that it was a feminine spirit. It was beautiful, and it was communicating with him, and it changed his life. And so Jake, all of this to say, Jake has gone on to form a group called Skywatcher, and their job is, and what they're doing is they are working on technology and human psionics, human telepathy, to communicate with UAP and with craft. The idea being that through these communications, we can gain more information. This is a way to communicate with them, to gain understanding. They also believe that they can call them in or communicate with them, and they'll show up in the sky. And according to him, they've had some pretty good success on this, and they're going to be presenting this information to the public in January. So their work is ongoing. I actually had on one of our breaks, I actually saw Jake and said hello to him, and he did a little video, said hello to my wife, Cheryl. So I was grateful to him for doing that. He's a nice man, seems very sincere, does not seem like he's selling a bag of goods. He seems very sincere and I think they're really doing important work. I don't know exactly what it is they're doing, but I think they're doing important work and they're very sincere about it. So that was quite a way to end the day. You start off with an astronomer doing, looking through the telescope and looking at artifacts in the sky. And, at the end of the day, you're talking about psionics and telepathy. And so it was quite a journey in the course of 8 hours from the time we started till the time we closed out. And I will say this, and it's not really in the notes here, but they did offer a couple of things in the evening. There was a movie that was made by a French guy whose name escapes me. It's a short movie, probably less than an hour, about a farmer in France who had this very strange encounter where he was out in his lavender fields at night, kind of checking on his lavender, and there was this craft. And when he encountered the craft, he was frozen, and these, whatever they were, beings of a sort, walked around, checked his field. He had sort of a psychic encounter with them, and then they took off. And the story was about how these people who have these encounters are usually very ordinary people, whether they're French farmers or, average people. And they're often subject to ridicule because this guy's life was never the same. He was a very earnest man. He was nobody who was out trying to get notoriety. In fact, he hated notoriety. But when he shared this with a friend, that this had happened, the friend then went to the press. And this is in the 1960s. And the police called him in. Can you imagine that? The police called him in just because he had reported this to a friend, like they thought he was crazy. And so I guess that could happen back then. But they called him in and they called him crazy and his life was disrupted. His wife didn't really believe him. But here's the important thing to remember about this movie. This was the important part of this very true story. His life was disrupted. And there was this guy in Paris who became aware of his story and read the story in one of the local newspapers and thought that there could be something to this. So he went to the town and interviewed this farmer and explained to him, look, this is not an unusual thing. This happens. And that guy's name was Jacques Vallée. So, way back then, Jacques Vallée was riding into the rescue. But it was an interesting movie. And it was a testament to the fact that, sometimes people call these folks that come forward grifters, or they're just trying to get notoriety. In most cases, these people don't want notoriety. They just have had their lives disrupted by the most unusual thing that's ever happened to them. And, they're trying to make sense of it. And sometimes they can, and sometimes they can't. So I think the point was well taken in the movie. We need to have compassion for these folks. So that's how we ended our day. And so with that, Vince, if it's all right with you, I'd like to open it up. We're at 8:00. So I'd like to open it up for questions. And I have a few questions of my own, if you don't mind. So
I'll make one comment just before we do the questions, give you a moment also to take a break, Sean. And that is that I think there were about 450 attendees at the conference, somewhere in that area. And everybody that I think John and I talked to was friendly, interested, on the cusp of trying to do good things. It was a very joyful, upbeat conference. And we were sitting first table, some guys from NASA were there and so on. It's just very, very interesting to be able to see people so enthusiastic about moving forward in life. I just thought that was an extremely important thing. Everyone very friendly. Hi, my name is Vince. I'm from here. I'm Jacques. I'm from here. All over the world, everybody interested in furthering this whole quest of, are we alone in the universe or not? So just with that little introduction, that little break, again, John is open to questions. Please feel very comfortable. We're here to discuss. If we don't finish tonight, we don't finish. Any comments, though, or any questions you'd like to raise?
I'd like to just add, Vince, too, before we take a question.
Sure.
To your point, I want to say that I had this experience last year as well. One of the really interesting things about walking into this group of people is that I don't know about the rest of you, but I follow this pretty closely. And I don't necessarily talk to everybody about it because, I mean, frankly, people either aren't interested or they think it's crazy or that I'm crazy, you know? So, you know, it's just maybe better left unsaid in most cases. one of the really, one of the really satisfying things about walking into the SOL Symposium is you don't have to explain yourself. Everybody there is in some way interested in this topic, you know, and nobody thinks anybody's crazy. It's just like, yeah, we all think this is real. Of course it's real, you know. I mean, you can't deny that it's real. So yeah, I would say the same is true. You know, everybody was willing to have a conversation or take a break, or you know, nobody was a nobody. There was no hierarchy at all, even with the presenters. The presenters were as genuine and grounded as any of us. So that was really really heartwarming to me.
And I'll add one other point. To many people with whom I discussed now creations, they were quite impressed with the consciousness raising we do in now creations. That's a hugely important thing for us. That I felt we were right at the cusp in our area of raising consciousness. Several people, in fact, felt, I think maybe in the future, hopefully they'll have a little bit more about consciousness and anecdotal experiences. But I feel the work we're doing with now creations was right there in the forefront of consciousness realization. Take it back to you,
Agreed.
John.
Agreed. So I'm only seeing one screen here. Are there any questions? Any comments?
You're explaining things so well, John. I'm not surprised. John Hoops, I think, has a question.
Yes, terrific, John. This is really, really good. Really good. Couple of things. Diana Pasulka, I've listened to some of her talks and podcasts. She is really down to earth and has really interesting. And I know you mentioned her, I think the last SOL Foundation. And so when you were talking about the Jake Barber Skywatcher Foundation, I somehow recollect that she was invited with him, or at least did some interviews and made some connections with other UAP speakers and so forth. But it was riveting reading the experience that Jake Barber went through, from the spiritual being, you said it well, not taken over in fear, but just taken over. He was doing what he was doing because of what they were doing, so to speak. I mean, it was really good, really good. So I would encourage anybody to just Google her, and boy, you'll hear some. I mean, she's a good speaker. And that doctor or the Colonel Carl Nell, when I pulled him up, wow, he is right. He gets your attention right away as a pretty bright guy. And then you mentioned in his, when he talked about some consciousness and openness and dreams and so forth. At least that's what I heard. And then you know, we share things here that we wouldn't often share, you said, with others. So last night I had a dream. It was just very simple, but it made me think of this consciousness aspect of it. I was sitting with a group of people and I was a student in a class, and there was this teacher, and I had this book in front of me, and I was leafing through the book as he was speaking, and he just caught my attention and said, keep going. And you know what? I was only on chapter 2. and the words were just as clear as could be. Keep going. So I have a feeling that's what's this is just kind of there's a lot coming and a lot going to happen. Yeah.
Mm.
So you've shared the feeling of what went on there really well, John, and all the interesting speakers you heard. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Yeah, this is. I'm going to veer off of the straight and narrow here with the soul presentation. This is John talking, and this is just me talking. I feel deeply, for a lot of reasons, that we are in a very I don't want to say specific way. I want to, in a very real way, we are on the edge of something, some kind of revelation that, and I don't want that to sound apocalyptic or anything like that. I don't mean it like that. But I think, Vince, I mean, you've probably been teaching this in Now Creations for a long time. Maybe it's just that, it pops when it pops for you, But I really do feel that we are in an it's not going to happen. It's already happening, where there is this expanded consciousness. I know that in the past couple of years, I'll just speak for myself, and some of it's to do with reading I've done through Now Creations, through other things. Like my whole worldview has shifted, like on consciousness, on the nature of reality. I mean, it just isn't anything I thought it was when I was younger. That's just my belief. Again, I'm speaking for me and me alone. I just think there are so many things happening, and I don't think it's random. I think that there is a purpose to it, and I think this conversation is part of it. I used to think, just like many people do, and I don't want to. I'm not here to convince anybody of anything. But when I was younger, and I've followed this topic for a long time, I read this book called Chariots of the Gods when I was 12 years old by Eric von Daniken, and that changed my life. And, I think that this has all been leading to something, and I think we're in the middle of it now. And I think things like dreams, John, I look at dreams a different way. I look at meditation a different way now. I look at them as portals, honestly. I think every night that I have a dream, when I can remember my dream, it has something important to tell me. I really, and I don't mean like you need to go pick up milk at the store tomorrow. I mean foundationally. So again, that's me speaking for me, but I appreciate you sharing that, because those are things I don't share, to everybody all the time, but I feel comfortable sharing it here. And I certainly would have shared those things at the Soul Foundation. So thank you for breaking that ground.
Thank you, John. Pam, I think you have a question.
John, are some of the people involved with the Soul Foundation involved with military intelligence?
That's a good question. That's something, Pam, that I am very hopeful that they will not do. Up to this point, I can say, to the best of my knowledge, no. I mean, they certainly have had, let's say, like they have ex-military folks that have been, part of the presentations. But I think that when you start inviting the military intelligence or the intelligence community into the conversation, it's a poison pill. And so far, to the best of my knowledge, they have not. And I hope they will not, because that can be a very slippery slope. And again, this is me speaking for me. I think the intelligence community is very aware of this conversation, and it's very important to them for reasons that may not be entirely benign. And it is my sincere hope that the leadership of Soul will resist whatever temptation to incorporate the military into these conversations. I don't mean the military, I mean the intelligence community into the conversations.
Thank you, John. Can I ask another question?
Sure.
Do you think that they're here already, the spaceships, and that we just can't see them because they keep themselves invisible?
I think that's a very big question, Pam, because I think that, the short answer is yes. I think they are. They, whatever they are, I don't know if it's a they and it. I think they're different manifestations of something I call the phenomenon, which is kind of the more largely used term now. That means a lot. It's a consciousness based thing. So yes, the short answer is I do believe that maybe craft are here, that we actually maybe have craft, but I think that the conversation is much larger than just craft. I think it's when we see orbs, when we see energy, we're now talking about plasma, conscious plasma that may be around the earth, and these things, sound kind of nutty to the outsider, but there's a lot of evidence to indicate that there's something to it.
Thank you, John.
John Hoops and JC.
Hi, John. My name's Jay.
Excuse me, John Hoops first and then JC.
Oh, sorry about that,
It's
Vince.
okay. John?
Yeah, that's fine. If time is permissible, John, you mentioned about Gary Nolan and the information that was brought to him, but you didn't want to expound on that. I'm curious, could you a little bit? That just caught my curiosity. Is that question clear?
Yeah, no, yeah, it's clear. So I'm happy to answer that, John, and I'm grateful for you asking it. And I'm going to preface it by saying some of these stories I've visited these stories so many times in my head that I just start rattling it off, and when I'm about halfway through, I realize that sounds like nonsense, because so many things in this conversation sound bizarre, and they are bizarre, but they're real. So this is Gary's story. So Gary Nolan is an immunologist at Stanford. In fact, I believe he's the chair of the Department of Immunology. He's a really bright guy, and his area of specialty is cancers and things like that, I believe. So years ago, and this Pam, this kind of weeds back to your question, but years ago, about 10 years ago, maybe more, Gary tells the story that he had a knock at his door. There were two guys there. They were from the government, and they had slides of pictures, and they said, "We need you to help us with this. We don't know what this is." They were slides of brain scans, and so he thought that it was a joke. He really says, "I thought it was a joke. These guys showing up my door saying they're from the government and they need to talk to me. Who am I? I'm an immunologist." But it was a sincere visit, and what they had were scans of people who had claimed to have been exposed to UAP and had, lesions on their brains that were unexplainable. And so he went through it, and Gary's a scientist, and he said, these, whatever the number was, this large percentage, they're attributable to other things, natural disease, whatever. And these other ones, these are very interesting. We don't know what they are. Well, they definitely show impact on the brain, not radiation, but something like it. We just don't know. And the reason it was interesting to him is because this lines up with so many people who have had direct encounters, particularly military people, who get close to craft, who have reports of being close to actual craft, where probably not by any malignant means, these craft have energy around them. And if you get too close or not in a very careful way, there can be an impact on the human body, frankly. Not all of this is, necessarily lovely information. Some of it gets into some, really nuts and bolts, dark stuff. At any rate, the feeling is that without any intention to hurt anybody, just like, the analogy is used, if you stand at the back end of a jet engine, doesn't mean the pilot's trying to hurt you. It just means that you were at the wrong place at the wrong time. So anyway, Gary came into it that way. He came into it through a back door where he became convinced through some of the medical work that he was doing that this stuff was unexplainable. And so he's gotten much more deeply into it. He's become an investigator of a sort, but he still maintains his day job. He's still an immunologist at Stanford, and he's working all the time. Literally, one of the things that he's working on right now is creating a device which will be able to analyze artifacts, like actual physical evidence to see if this is made on Earth. Because there are materials, and I can't get into the details of this, but there are construction methods that really defy, or materials found with construction methods that defy anything that can be explained here on Earth. So he's in possession of some of these things, and he's trying to do greater scientific study on them. So I don't know if that sounds like a long and winding road, but I hope it answers your question.
Well, that was good. Thank you, John. Thank you. Yes.
JC up, and then afterwards Karen or Tim. Not sure which one. JC first.
Hi, John.
Hi, Jay.
I just really want to say thank you. And I would like to extend that to all the folks that are willing to look at this from a new perspective. You guys really are the pioneers welcoming in a new paradigm, because this really does change everything. It's unsettling. It's a little difficult to swallow, but I think it's really important work. And yeah, that's it. I just really want to tell you and Vince both thank you.
Well, thank you, JC. I appreciate that, and I want to say, I'll take that, and I appreciate it. I want to really pass the baton or the torch to Vince, because Vince is the one that recognized this as a topic to really take seriously, and invited the Cosmic Citizens Committee into existence, and these reports that we've been doing, and has taken the topic seriously, and has sponsored my attendance at SOL. That's a real commitment there, and I just really want to acknowledge Vince in that regard. So thank you, Vince.
Thank you, John. Thank you, JC. Tim or Karen, I'm not sure which one. Tim?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
John, thank you very much for your presentation. It was very, very good.
Thank you, Tim.
And you also, Vince. I was wondering, you have this, you get together once a year or just more frequently, these people that gave these talks? Just once a year you have you get together and
symposium.
Yes.
Symposium? Yes. So the symposium is held, they've only done 3. The first 2 were in San Francisco. The third one was in Italy. And they're all around this time. I think last year it was in November. This one was in late October. I don't know where the next one will be. My guess is it will be back in the United States, my guess, but it could be somewhere else. I don't know. I know what they're trying to do is they're trying to make this a global thing, not just a US thing. So who knows? Maybe it'll be in South America next year, because you know what? What many people don't realize is South America has tons of information about this. So many things happen in South America, Brazil, Colombia, Peru. I mean, it's astonishing when you start digging into this. So to answer your question, yes, it's once a year, but we do reports periodically in the Cosmic Citizens Committee, and I try to include others from the committee to do reports, and they do great work. All of these things are elements of this conversation. So I would just invite you to review the Cosmic Citizens reports that are on the website, because they're all pretty interesting.
And I have one other question. You have all these very intelligent people researching their own certain aspect of this. Okay. And sometimes when you do that, for various reasons, because of funding, whatever, information is siloed up and not distributed to other people working on other aspects of this. And I just wondered if you knew how much every day, I understand that these are all very, very important people and very, very, very busy, but sometimes what one person has discovered or believes could help in another facet. And I was wondering how much interchange, if you could get a grasp or a feel for how much they interchange their fields and their information with each other.
Well, Tim, I think you're hitting at the heart of this whole conversation, to be honest with you, because that's what the SOL Foundation is about. And that's what I mean, that is their mission. Their mission is to bring together all these folks who may be working, as you said, these siloed capacities, and bringing them together so that you have a sociologist talking to a physicist and saying, hey, how does this go together? Do they go together? How do these things align? That's the meat and potatoes of what the SOL Foundation is doing. And they're just the biggest one. There are other organizations, and we'll talk about this next week. There are organizations all over the world that are doing something like this. SOL just happens to be probably the biggest and the most academically oriented of these. But there's one called I just stumbled across it yesterday. I think it's called the Center for UAP Studies. And they're, doing exactly what you talked about. They're bringing together people from all these disciplines to talk about this conversation because it reaches into everything. So thank you for highlighting that. I think that's the meat and potatoes of what we're talking about tonight.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Karen, do you think you have a comment?
Yes, I do now. And so was there any information available then as to the diversity or background of the audience then? How, what were those backgrounds of people that drew them there to the audience?
Well, I'll just start with some anecdotal information because I don't have a breakdown of that. I would say, based on my meeting people, and I was pretty quick to kind of stick out my hand and say hello to people. And Vince mentioned it on the first day we were there. The first morning that we were there, had breakfast with people. One guy was a NASA engineer. The other guy was a reporter from Belgium. So there was this mix of science. There was the lady that sat in front of us, this woman that sat in front of us, was not, she wasn't in any kind of category. She was there just like me. This is interesting to her. They had recently been in Nepal, and for her husband is a Buddhist. He wanted to go to Nepal, and they took a side trip to go to the SOL Foundation. So it wasn't like it was full of a bunch of, sociologists or physicists, although they were there, I'm sure. It was a real cross section of people.
And I would just want to affirm that entrepreneurs were there, people just interested in consciousness were there. It was very, very, very interesting. For whatever reason, I was drawn to the people who seemed to be more interested in consciousness, because I think there's no more anomalous phenomenon than consciousness. Consciousness everybody has, but nobody knows what it is. This is a very interesting thing. So I would just affirm what John was saying, Karen. I don't know if they really could do a cross section. Maybe they can't. Maybe they will. Maybe they have. We'll find out. And John, we're moving right during to the last couple minutes now. So I think we'll be ready for day 2 next week. That'll be the 23rd. And I suspect that conversation is going to go beyond next week. So we'll see if the 30th will work, but we'll get all that worked out. In the meantime, we will have this available on our website. Just go to the Cosmic Citizens Committee report. And Tony said the first one that comes up there will be this program that we had here tonight. Are there any other comments anyone would like to make to John, first of all?
Vince, I would like to just say, if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to take an email. Email me, call me, I'm happy.
And that email is on the download, by the way. So I just want to make sure you know that, okay? Or call John in our directory. John, is there anything else you would like to add from tonight?
No, just thank you, everybody, for showing up. Appreciate it very much.
Absolutely. This is an important thing for all of us. So I think we can happily conclude as we normally do. I am an eternal being of light and love. Thus, only good can come to me, and only good can come from me. And we are eternal beings of light and love. Thus, only good can come to us, and only good can come from us. Namaste. And please, let's not have anything until I conclude the recording.